Decameron. Love Stories, The Knight's Confession. Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. The silence in the Great Hall of Blackstone Keep was a heavy living thing, thick with the scent of wood smoke, cold stone, and unspoken accusations. It was the silence of a house grieving its own future. Lord Tancred, his face a mask of granite etched with new lines of pain, stared into the roaring fire as if he could divine his fate in the flames. His only son and heir, Sir Giscard, was dead, not in glorious battle against the mountain clans, but here within his own walls, felled by a poison as subtle as it was cruel. And the evidence, a single ornate dagger belonging to his most trusted knight and sworn shield, Sir Guillaume, pointed to a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter the very foundations of the northern kingdom. Guillaume now stood before him, not in chains, but in the simple tunic of a man who had surrendered his sword and his fate. His hands, usually so sure on the hilt of his blade, were clenched at his sides, but his gaze was steady, fixed on the woman weeping silently by the hearth. It was the Lady Gismonda, Tancred's daughter, Giscard's sister, and in her tears Guillaume saw the ruin of all his silent, hopeless devotion. "Confess!" Tancred's voice cracked through the hall like a whip. "Confess to this black treason, Guillaume. You were found in his chambers, your blade still wet with his life's blood. My son is cold, and you stand there with his blood on your steel. Give me a reason not to have you drawn and quartered at dawn." Guillaume's eyes flickered from Gismonda's bowed head back to her father. He could taste the lie on his tongue, the easy confession that would end this. But it would be a second murder, the killing of a truth more precious to him than his own honor. "My lord," he said, his voice low and resonant, filling the tense space, "I did not kill Sir Giscard." "Lies!" Tancred roared, slamming his fist on the arm of his chair. "You were his rival. You coveted his position, his favor." A bitter, helpless smile touched Guillaume's lips for a fleeting second. If only that were the depth of his sin. His rivalry with Giscard had never been about position or favor. It had always been about her, Gismonda, the unattainable star around which his lonely orbit had spun for a decade. He had loved her from the moment he first pledged his service to her house, a lowly knight elevated beyond his station. He had loved her through her own political marriage to a southern lord, a union that had ended just a year ago with her return, a widow, to Blackstone. He had loved her in silence, a constant fierce flame banked behind a wall of duty. Giscard, protective and ambitious, had seen the embers in his eyes and had warned him away. "She is not for you, Guillaume. Remember your place." "I coveted nothing that belonged to your son," Guillaume said, the truth a careful, partial thing. It was then that Gismonda looked up. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky after a storm, were red-rimmed but dry now, and in their depths, he saw not accusation but a desperate, searching fear. "Then why, Guillaume?" Her voice was a whisper that carried through the hall. "Why were you there? Tell us." He could not. To tell them why he had rushed to Giscard's chamber upon hearing a struggle was to confess everything. He had found Giscard staggering, the hilt of the dagger protruding from his side, the life already fading from his eyes. With his last breath, Giscard had gasped not a name, but a warning, a secret so dangerous it had cost him his life, a secret about a plot that reached to the highest levels of the court, a conspiracy that threatened the crown itself. and implicating a powerful unnamed lord whose wrath would be swift and absolute. To reveal this was to paint a target on Tancred's back, on Gismondus. Guillaume had made a choice in that bloody moment. He had pulled the dagger free, making it look like the killing blow, and had taken the blame upon himself to shield them from a far more dangerous enemy. "I cannot, my lady," he said, his gaze holding hers, pouring every ounce of his unspoken love, his sacrifice, into that one look. He didn't plead for his life. He confessed his devotion through his silence, through his willingness to die for her safety. Tancred saw the look that passed between them, and a new, uglier understanding dawned in his eyes. "By the gods," he breathed, his voice dripping with disgust. "It was not his position you coveted. It was his sister. You snake. You would kill my son to get to my daughter." Guillaume said nothing. He let the accusation hang in the air, a shield for the greater truth. It was a confession of a kind, a confession to the wrong crime for the right reason. "Take him to the dungeons," Tancred snarled, turning his back in finality. "At dawn, he will confess his treason to the headsman." As the guard seized his arms, Guillaume's eyes never left Gismonda. He saw the conflict in her face, the shock, the dawning horror, but beneath it, a flicker of something else. A doubt, a memory of 1,000 small kindnesses, a lifetime of unwavering loyalty. She took a half-step forward, her hand trembling as it reached out, then fell back to her side. He didn't speak her name. He branded his soul onto hers with a final, lingering look as they dragged him away into the darkness. The heavy oak door of the great hall boomed shut, sealing his fate. But as he was led down into the cold and the damp, Guillaume clung to that single fragile flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was a small cold ember in the overwhelming darkness, but for a man condemned, it was the only warmth he had left. The dungeons of Blackstone Keep were hewn from the living rock, perpetually weeping a cold, salty dampness that seeped into the bones and the soul. Guillaume sat on a stone ledge, the rough wall at his back, and listened to the rhythmic drip of water marking the passage of the hours he had left. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and despair. Through a narrow barred window high on the wall, a sliver of moon cast a pale, guiltless light onto the filthy straw. He had replayed the scene in Guiscard's chamber 100 times, the weight of the dagger in his hand, the hot blood on his fingers, the dying man's whispered secret, a name, a title that had frozen the very blood in his veins. Lord Vortimer, the king's own chancellor. To speak that name now would be to sign not only his own death warrant, but Gismondus and Tancred's as well. Vortimer's reach was long, his methods silent and final. A public execution for a murdered heir was a cleaner, quicker death than the one Vortimer would arrange. The scrape of the cell door's heavy bolt broke the silence. He expected a guard with a final meal, or the grim-faced priest. Instead, a figure shrouded in a dark, heavy cloak slipped inside. The door closed, plunging them back into near darkness, but he knew her by the subtle shift in the air, by the faint scent of lavender and beeswax that clung to her, a memory of sunlit chambers and a life he would never know again. She pushed back her hood. Gismondus' face was pale in the gloom, her eyes vast and dark with a turmoil that mirrored the storm in his own heart. "You should not be here, my lady," he said, his voice rough from the cold and disuse. The title felt like a lie now, after the accusation her father had flung between them. "Tell me it is not true," she whispered, her voice trembling yet fierce. She stood just inside the door, as if afraid to cross the threshold into his world of condemned men. Look at me and tell me you did not kill my brother for some foolish hope of me." He rose slowly to his feet, the chains on his wrists clinking a dull accompaniment to the pounding of his heart. The sliver of moonlight caught the angles of his face, the stark honesty in his eyes. "I did not kill Giscard," he said, each word measured and firm. "I would have given my own life for his 1,000 times over. You must know that." "Then why?" she implored, taking a step forward now, her hands clenched at her sides. "Why will you not give my father the truth? What is this secret you protect with your life?" He could not tell her. To speak Lord Vortimer's name here, even in a whisper, was to risk her life. The walls, he was certain, had ears. So he gave her a different truth, the one that had fueled his every breath for years. He moved closer, the space between them crackling with the intensity of a storm about to break. The air grew thick with the scent of her, of the damp stone, and of unspeakable desire. "The truth," he said, his voice dropping to a husky murmur that was for her alone, "is that I have loved you since the day I first knelt in your father's hall. The truth is that the thought of you has been my only solace in every battle, my only prayer in every darkness." He lifted his manacled hands, not to touch her, but to show her the chains. "This is not a prison, Gismonda. I have been a prisoner to my love for you for a decade. This cell, this is just a smaller cage." A sob escaped her, but she did not look away. Her gaze dropped to his mouth, then back to his eyes. "Guillaume." He didn't kiss her lips. He confessed his hunger through the charged silence that stretched between them, through the raw, aching need in his eyes that devoured the space separating their bodies. He could feel the heat radiating from her, see the frantic pulse at the base of her throat. His shackled hands trembled with the effort of not reaching for her, not pulling her into the one embrace he had dreamed of his entire life. "Your father was right to name me a snake," he breathed, his words a caress in the dark. "For my thoughts of you have never been those of a loyal knight. They have been a man's thoughts, forbidden, consuming." This was the emotional climax, the confession he had sworn he would take to his grave. It was more intimate than any physical joining, this baring of a soul she had owned for so long without knowing it. Tears traced clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. She did not recoil. Instead, she lifted her own hand, her fingers hovering just inches from the cold iron around his wrist. Her touch was a ghost of a sensation, but it sent a jolt of pure lightning through him. "I do not believe you are a killer," she said, her voice firm now, certain. "And I will not let you die for a crime you did not commit." Her words were his redemption, his absolution. It was all he needed. The Dawn and the headsman held no terror if he died with her belief in him. "You must go," he urged softly, his gaze drinking her in, memorizing every detail for the final walk. "It is not safe for you here." She nodded, pulling her cloak back around her shoulders, her eyes never leaving his. "I will find the truth, Guillaume. I swear it." And then she was gone, the door closing with a soft final thud, leaving him alone with the echo of her promise and the scent of lavender lingering in the foul air. He was still a condemned man. The bitterness of his fate was unchanged, but the sweet, lingering aftertaste of her faith, of her touch so near his skin, was a shield against the coming darkness. He had lost his freedom and would likely lose his life, but in her eyes for a moment, he had not been a traitor. He had been a man in love. And for a knight who had lived his life by a code of honor, that was a victory worth any price. Dawn was a blade of cold gray light cutting through the narrow window of Guillaume's cell. It was the color of regret, of endings. He could hear the grim preparations in the courtyard beyond, the shuffling of feet, the low murmur of a gathered crowd, the unmistakable sound of a block being readied. He met the day with a strange, hollow peace. Gismonda's belief was a warm ember in his chest, a final private victory. He would carry the memory of her face in the dungeon, the conviction in her voice, to whatever lay beyond. The cell door groaned open, but it was not the headsman or the guards. It was Gismonda once more, her face pale but etched with a terrifying resolve. Behind her stood Brother Aldous, the castle's aged, stooped chaplain, his hands trembling as he clutched a heavy leather-bound Bible. "Give us a moment," Gismonda commanded the guards, her voice allowing no argument. She was every inch the Lady of Blackstone, her grief forged into steel. The guards glanced at each other, then bowed and stepped back. As the door closed, leaving the three of them in the dim cell, Brother Aldous's nervousness seemed to fill the space. Gismonda's eyes locked with Guillaume's. "Brother Aldous was called to hear my brother's last confession," she said, her words swift and precise. "He has been troubled. His vows war with his conscience." The old priest flinched, his gaze fixed on the floor. "My lady, I cannot. It is the sacred seal. A man is about to die for a sin he did not commit." Gismonda's whisper was fierce, a lash of sound. "Does your God value a secret over a life? Giscard did not give you a name, but he gave you something. A truth you have carried like a stone." Guillaume watched, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the gamble. This was the fragile thread of hope she had grasped. Brother Aldous wept, silent, wretched tears that traced through the wrinkles of his face. He looked at Guillaume, at the proud, broken knight standing in chains, and then at Gismonda's unyielding stare. The moral weight in the cell was immense, a pressure threatening to crush them all. He did not speak a name," the priest finally choked out, his voice a dry rustle. "But with his last breath, he clutched my robe and he said, 'The Chancellor's hawk flies at midnight.' He said it twice. 'The hawk flies at midnight.' Then he was gone. The world stopped. The Chancellor's hawk, Lord Vortimer's personal sigil, flies at midnight. The code for an assassination. Giscard had discovered the plot. He had been silenced. And Guillaume, by taking the blame, had unwittingly played right into Vortimer's hands, removing a loyal knight and disgracing a powerful house in one stroke. The truth now spoken was a physical force in the cell. Gismonda's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that surpassed even her grief. The conspiracy was vaster, more venomous, than she had ever imagined. At that moment the door burst open. Lord Tancred stood there, his face a thundercloud, the headsmen and guards behind him. "Enough of this, Gismonda. It is time." "Father, stop!" she cried, turning to him, placing her body between him and Guillaume. "He is innocent. Giscard discovered a plot against the crown. He was killed by Lord Vortimer's agents to silence him. Guillaume was trying to protect us." Tancred's face went from fury to a stunned ashen gray. "Vortimer? You have proof." "Brother Aldous heard Giscard's dying words," Gismonda said, her voice shaking but clear. "The Chancellor's hawk flies at midnight." The ancient stooped priest gave a feeble, terrified nod, confirming her words. The silence that fell was more profound than any that had come before. The sound of the axe being sharpened in the courtyard suddenly seemed obscene. Tancred looked from his daughter's desperate, truthful face to Guillaume, who stood straight and silent, his own truth finally vindicated not by his own words, but by hers. The Lord of Blackstone's shoulders slumped. The vengeful father was replaced by the calculating lord. He knew what this meant. To accuse Vortimer was to declare war. But to execute an innocent man, a man who had willingly faced death to shield his house, was a stain on his honor that no water could cleanse. He gestured to the guards. "Remove his chains." The cold iron fell from Guillaume's wrists with a heavy clatter that echoed like a bell of liberation. The blood rushed back into his hands, a painful, glorious feeling of life returning. Tancred's gaze was complex, a mixture of shame, gratitude, and a dawning grim strategy. "It seems I owe you a debt I can never repay, Sir Guillaume. My house owes you its honor, and perhaps its future." He then turned, his voice becoming a lord's command. "No word of this leaves this dungeon. Vortimer must believe his plan has succeeded. Guillaume, you are dead to the world. You will become my shadow, my blade in the dark. We have a traitor to unmask." As Tancred and the priest departed, already whispering of plans and counterplots, Guillaume and Gismonda were left alone for a final, breathless moment in the cell. The immediate danger had passed, but a greater, more shadowy war had just begun. He took a step towards her, his freed hand lifting to finally truly touch her. He cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking the soft skin. It was not the desperate hunger of the dungeon, but a touch of reverence, of a future unexpectedly, miraculously reclaimed. She leaned into his palm, her eyes closing for a second, a single tear of relief tracing a path over his fingers. "You did not have to save me," he whispered. "Yes, I did," she replied, her voice steady, her gaze holding his with a new, unbreakable certainty. "For you have always been mine." He didn't kiss her lips, not yet. The confession was complete, the redemption won. Their love, once a silent, hopeless secret, was now the very weapon they would wield in the shadows. Their future was fraught with peril, their path woven with intrigue and the constant threat of death. But as they stood together in the crumbling cell, the dawn's gray light now seeming full of promise, they knew a bittersweet truth. Their love had been forged in fire and proven in sacrifice. It was a story not of a knight's confession, but of a lady's faith. And it was only the beginning. And so the shadow of the axe recedes, replaced by the even greater peril of a conspiracy that threatens the crown itself. Guillaume and Gismonda's love, once a silent confession, is now a weapon in the dark. But their story is just one of many waiting to be told. If this tale of a knight's ultimate sacrifice and a lady's unwavering faith has captured your heart, then the adventure is just beginning. Join the court of Velvet Valor. Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new chapter. Here you will find more full-length romantasy audiobooks where forbidden love defies destiny, and passion is forged in the fires of intrigue and war. We want to hear your voice in our council. Tell us in the comments. Who did you trust more? Guillaume's silent honor or Gismonda's relentless faith? What fate do you predict for Lord Vortimer? If you believe that the most powerful magic is a love that risks everything, let a like be your seal of approval. It helps us immensely and tells us which stories to bring you next. Thank you for listening. Until the next tale from the world of Velvet Valor.